Hey, it's Jared. Well, I've been using Nano Texture Display Apple devices for the last year. Last year, the iPad M4 edition came with Nano Texture Display as an option. And it was kind of controversial at first and still is a topic of conversation among purists who think that the Nano Texture Display is a downgrade in the quality. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm a professional photographer. I edit a ton of photos on my iPad, and I also have the MacBook Pro M4 that has nano texture as well. So we've got two iPads, both the iPad Pro size options, as well as the MacBook that we're going to look at in this video. And I'm going to talk about things like how to deal with fingerprints. We're going to talk about clarity and reflection, and of course, all of those different topics. So let's first of all take a look at the 11-inch iPad Pro M4. That's what I have here, and it has a good amount of fingerprints on it. Let's see if I can kind of show you what it looks like. You could tell the glare is not much because this is the nano texture, but you can see that there are a lot of fingerprints and smudges all over this display. And that is what you're going to expect to have happen on a nano texture display. It's going to get smudged up. Fingerprints are going to get in there because the nano texture is going to collect grease from your fingerprints, especially if you use an iPad a lot. The touch display as opposed to a keyboard and a mouse, you're gonna end up having a lot of fingerprints all over that. I thought at first, it comes with the cleaning cloth, and the cleaning cloth has its own lore. People have their own things to say about this, but I thought, why can't you just clean it with something else? I mean, I have cleaned for years all of my devices with this Koala Precision Lens Cleaner, and I decided, let's try and clean my iPad with that, and of course a microfiber cloth, and we'll just go ahead and try and clean the display and see what happens after we sprayed some on there and we use the microfiber cloth. Let's take a look and see how it went. Well, it actually did okay, but you can see there's still a lot of deeper smudge in there that just didn't come off. It took care of the top layer, and I think it did an okay job, but it did not clean it. You can see there's quite a bit here and some marks and stuff up there on the top. Now, you really do need the Apple cleaning cloth, but I don't recommend using the Apple cleaning cloth to clean off the first layer because this ends up getting really grimy, and then eventually this is going to be a mess and you're going to end up needing to order more of them or figure out the best way to clean them. I have washed one of these, and I don't recommend washing it in a washing machine. I highly recommend washing this with soap by your hands and just rubbing it and cleaning it and then rinsing it out and letting it air dry. That's how you want to deal with cleaning one of these. And same goes with this type of microfiber cloth. You can wash this in a washing machine, but you don't want to put this in the dryer. You want to let these like line dry or something like that. So now that we've got the top layer off of the iPad, let's go ahead and just go in a circular motion and clean off the rest of the smudges using this magic cloth that Apple has developed. And I'm also getting some dust and stuff out of the corners of this case because this particular case has kind of ridges going all the way around it. So we might even need to introduce a little bit of air just to blow some of the rest of the dust out of the corners here. You really do need to use a little bit of pressure when you're using this cleaning cloth to clean the iPad. So if I was on a glossy iPad, I would not have to put this much effort into cleaning the iPad. I could spray a little bit of lens cleaner and boom, I'm done. It's perfectly clean. So now let's look at the screen. You can see that pretty much everything, I think I missed a spot right there, but you can see that it is perfectly smudge free now on the majority of the screen. Maybe just a couple little spots that I need to get after. So everything does look really clean and it worked really well. Now, there is a mark on my nano texture display, and that's something that irritated me when I first discovered that. I don't know if you can see this little tiny mark here on the display. It's really hard to see, but it is a imperfection in the display. And there's another one right there, and there's another one right there. And those are imperfections that I don't know exactly how I got them. They were not from using this cleaning cloth or anything like that. They just happened, and it's irritating because they're kind of shiny. When I look at it from an angle, those spots are kind of shiny. I can't really notice it when the display is on, so it's not that big of a deal. But anyways, cleaning these things can be a bit more of a challenge, and you do need to have your Apple cleaning cloth with you. I just recommend going over gently with something else so that you can get the top layer of grease off, just so that you get more longevity out of your Apple cleaning cloth. And I have to do that on all of my devices. If I move over to the 13-inch iPad Pro, I end up having to do the same thing. It ends up smudging and getting a lot of, like, especially up in the corners, there's a good smudge right here. I think you can see there. Yeah, good smudges right there all over the display. And then if we look at the MacBook Pro, which a lot of times I'm using this connected to an external monitor, but often I'm using it as a laptop as well. It ends up getting smudged up also, mainly just in the corners where I'm opening and closing the laptop and my fingerprints are hitting the screen. And so I have to do the same thing with my cleaning cloth and go over the display, but it's a little bit more annoying to do that on the MacBook Pro display because I have to kind of brace the display and get up into all these corners where my fingerprints might have been and rub on the display. I fear pushing on it too hard because it's a laptop display, and I'm still remembering back in the day when you push on the display and it turns colors. And so I still have a fear of pressing on the display, even though I know that the technology these days can handle a little bit more pressure, especially the iPads, but I know I'm not causing any issues. Cleaning process is much more involved on the Nano Texture display. So with all of that said, like, why am I still using a Nano Texture display? And why am I making this video instead of just maybe a bash video on the Nano Texture display? Because it seems like it's troublesome. Well, I absolutely love using the Nano Texture display because most of the time I am working somewhere where there's glare. I might be in a coffee shop. I might be at my office. I might be here in the studio where I have lights that can create major reflection issues and glare on the screen, which makes it hard for me to see things more clearly. And so the Nano Texture display definitely helps cut down on all of those glares. And I don't think there's any argument there about whether the Nano Texture display does a better job of that than when you have the glossy display. The main argument that I run into is that the Nano Texture display isn't as vibrant. The colors aren't as vibrant. The display just isn't as nice to look at as the glossy display. And I do think there's a little bit of truth there. With the glossy display, things do seem a bit contrastier. If you're familiar with cameras and shooting video, there's the concept of shooting in more of a log format, which doesn't have any processing on the footage, which means it's not very contrasty. But then you go and make those adjustments later when you're video editing so that you can control the amount of contrast and all of that stuff. There does seem to be a little bit of a lack of contrast in the Nano Texture displays, but it's not that big of a deal. And if you know what you're looking at, then you're not going to run into any problems there. And I would prefer to have a little bit less of a glossy look than to have an overly glossed display that might even be glossier than what most other people's displays look like. So when I'm editing photos, if I am editing them to my MacBook Pro display and they look great, and then somebody might be looking at those photos on a television or some other device that doesn't have as glossy of a display, then I also might be going in the opposite direction, making my photos look more contrasty than they need to be. And when you're producing any other sort of content that should be going on a display, it's going to go on various different types of displays, some glossy, some not, some newer technology, some older technology, some really inexpensive with a low contrast ratio, and some much higher in contrast ratio, HDR, non-HDR. There's so many different types of devices that you could potentially be creating content to go on. So you need to kind of shoot down the middle and try and figure out what's a middle range as far as a display that I can create my content and looks good on the display that I have. And then if I really want to be sure, then I should probably be testing my content on other displays as well. Most of us are not doing that. The only people that would be doing that are producing higher end content for cinema or television. And really, though, you should be testing your content. If I shoot something on a camera and it's a new camera, I don't know a whole lot about that camera, I'm going to test and see what that footage looks like on my computer screen, on my phone, on a television screen, just to see what the differences are there and how I might need to adjust the camera. And I feel the same way about the Nano Texture display. The Nano Texture display doesn't overemphasize things, so I'm not getting a false sense of contrast or sharpness because of the display. Now, the Nano Texture display is not lower sharpness, but it is a little bit lower contrast. When I look at different things, so if I pull up Adobe Lightroom and look at photos in Lightroom, I'm not noticing any less sharpness that I would see if I was looking at another computer monitor. The Nano Texture display is absolutely beautiful, but it is lacking a little bit in contrast and compared to a glossy display. And the same thing goes if I'm looking at images on the iPad. It is clear, nice and sharp. Everything looks good on the images, but it's not as contrasty as if I was looking at images on a glossy display. So last year, it was the very beginning of May when these devices became available. And so I've spent the last year using them and have had some time on glossy displays, as well as all of my kids have laptops with glossy displays. And I still have an iPhone and another iPad with a glossy display. Do I miss the glossy display? Well, I have to say, I think the cut down on glare means that I'm not constantly having to realign myself or my equipment so that I can continue working. If I'm using the iPad out in the field, editing photos on a job, then I don't have to worry about glare nearly as much as I would otherwise. And because of that, I noticed that the lack of glare also is easier on my eyes. You see, as I might be sitting next to a window and the sun is starting to move and a glare is starting to generate or starting to form on the screen, I'm maybe squinting a little bit more and looking at the display and trying to see things a little bit more clear until it becomes an annoying problem. And when it has become an annoying problem, I might have introduced some eye strain for the last 30 minutes or even an hour, and that's going to reduce the amount of time that I could spend behind the screen before I might end up with a small headache. Now, this situation may vary depending on how sensitive your eyes are. I don't feel like my eyes are that sensitive, but I do notice that after a bit of eye strain, there is a bit of fatigue there, and I end up either needing to change my environment or move on to a different type of task. So I'd love to hear what you think. Have you spent some time with a Nano Texture display? Share your thoughts down in the comment section below. Maybe you're anti-Nano Texture. I'd love to hear your arguments down in the comment section below as well. But that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for checking it out. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you back in another one soon. Take care.